Welcome to Not Starving Artists, the podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Benson, money coach and equity actor. I am your financial cheerleader, here to help you build your financial confidence and have power over your money. The best part, no budgeting or bi-weekly paychecks required. I went from being a broke BFA grad having weekly panic attacks about money to a financially confident, wealth-building actor and business owner. Money gets to feel fun, simple, and sexy, and I am going to show you how. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new podcast series that I'm calling Industry Experts, How to Spend Money on Your Artistic Career. Now, this series is going to give you, actors, creatives, those of you in the artistic industries, opinions from a panel of people who have been in the industry for a while on their opinions and thoughts of the best way to use your money to grow your artistic career. As a money coach, I'm going to teach you how to save money without a consistent paycheck. I'm going to teach you how to create longevity in your career via financial stability. I'm going to make sure you have the money available to you to not only spend money on your career now, but be able to put towards future you so you can continue to be an artist long term. And these interviews are going to bring in opinions and thoughts from people in this industry about the best ways to use that money. We could spend so much money on our artistic career, on headshots, on reels, on classes, on coaches, on flying ourselves out to auditions, on putting ourselves up for gigs, on producing our own work. There's so many ways to spend our money that we need to be intentional about which ways are going to feel best for us and give us the best return on our investment. And what's tricky about artistic careers is it's not like you spend money on something and that automatically equals a booking or that automatically equals a callback, right? It's a lot more gray area than that, right? And so this panel of experts, these interviews that you're going to hear every other week, we're going to release episodes in this series. What you're going to hear is different people's opinions from different areas of the field. And it's going to help give you a grounding in what's actually worth it. What do you feel is actually worth it to spend your money on? And what are the ways, because it's also really easy as artists, as creatives, to not want to spend money on your creative career, right? Because you don't see that immediate ROI and it can feel scary to part with your dollars. And so this is also going to help give you a grounding on like, how would it feel good to spend money on my career? How would it feel good to put money towards my artistry in the same way that I put money towards other areas of my life? So I hope you enjoy this series. We've got some awesome guests lined up. Enjoy, and happy creating. I am so excited to welcome Michael onto the podcast today. He's been a casting director for over 20 years. He has cast over 1,000 theater and film projects and is a 3-time Artios Award nominee. So Michael, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. Thanks for asking, and excited to chat.
Yeah. So Michael, why did you say yes to this interview today?
I think that generally speaking, I like to I just like to chat about things like this. I like to deep dive when possible. I try to exist, in terms of my work as a casting director. I try to exist with transparency where possible. I think sometimes there are limits to that, or maybe in terms of how transparent we can be about what information we're putting out into the world. I mean, to just be transparent about everything can be overwhelming sometimes. So when there are chances to speak about specific topics. I also work as an educator. I teach at universities, and one of in recent years I've been on the faculty at Wright State University, where I teach a 16-week business of acting course. One of the big topics there is personal finance and just kind of everything in terms of life preparedness for college seniors entering the field. So on my end, it's something that I always am learning different things about, and am eager to do that. But I'm also eager to share the things I've picked up along the way.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm gonna switch up how I was gonna ask you these questions because you talk
Sure.
about being an educator, right? And working with students in a lot of different spaces for a long time. And I'd love to know your opinion because I've been doing college workshops as well alongside the money coaching that I do here. And I've noticed like a shift in the zeitgeist and the energy in the questions that are being asked in workshops, the like narratives and headspaces of students who are graduating into this world now in the artistic industries. So I just want to ask you just an overarching question of have you seen shifts in that? What is the energy that you're seeing inside of students and colleges, all that?
I just had a sneeze that kind of dissipated. So, so forgive that kind of excited start. But yeah, I do think I've noticed kind of I think the questions, I think the priorities, I think I've noticed a shift in maybe the overall timbre of the conversation. I think that part of it for me is I've I moved to New York in the fall of 2002, so I just celebrated
Oh my gosh, yeah, wow.
Thanksgiving was 23 years, and it was the day after Thanksgiving. And when I moved from Ohio, from where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I went to school in Columbus, and I moved here as a senior in college, um, and access to information was a very different thing. Access to information was quite limited. I mean, the internet existed, thank you, but it wasn't by any means what it is now, where I will now, be teaching at a university in the middle of the country, let's say, that 25 years ago would have been fairly cut off, would have been limited to the books in its library. If it were, a musical theater program, it would be limited to the scores that they happen to have nearby. And, you know, what I to a point where within a quarter of a century, um, access to information is just so profound and abundant and terrifying in many ways because and I think that actually influences the kinds of questions that are being asked, the kind of conversations that are being had, because a young person at a university might see someone on TikTok talking about, the rent being too damn high, or that was I mean, that some of you will remember the rent's too damn high party that was a political party in New York. But they'll see that kind of thing, and they'll make that their narrative and their questioning and their kind of base of things. And so on it's valuable, but I think it can also overwhelm, right? So that it's not necessarily something um I without going too far afield, I do think the conversations have changed
Mhm,
because of access to information. I think
mhm,
that and I think the downside of that I can say is perhaps that, I'll meet 21-year-olds now who are so like seasoned and over it because they've, been having all of this stuff thrown at them.
mhm.
Whereas it used to be maybe a little dewier. It was a little kind of like the world is my oyster. Now there's
Yeah.
almost a cynicism that's crept in
Mhm.
because of, well, they see this and they see that and they just watch their favorite influencer go through a breakup and have to pay rent and like whatever the thing is, that's the kind of stuff that's weighing on them, where it used to be, I think, a little more self-focused on, I need to move to the city, I need to meet this goal, I need to, and there are exceptions to every generalization, but that's kind of, I do think the conversation has changed.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you in this like overarching cynicism that I think has crept in. And I think specifically with artistry and money as artists, there is a bit of delusion that is required, right? A little bit of that narrow focus, I think, to even be able to start pursuing this path, right? And with all of that information at one time, like you said, it's so wonderful that we have so much access. But then I'm going to talk about the starving artist trope specifically, but it's this like collective trauma of being starving artists that we take on as individuals, and that I see young people specifically taking on so much. And then it's harder to have that delusion or to even be focusing on the craft, right? It's so much of I need to focus on making ends meet, which I think is very important, right? But then we've lost the thing I think that should be so exciting to be thinking about in those younger years.
Yeah, through teaching, at the university level, I've taught for many years, like a one day I come in and I work with all the students. Like I've done that for many years. The last 5 years doing more of a, like a full-time 3 day a week kind of course
Yeah.
on these topics. That's the conversation. I see my purpose as trying to encourage people to have the audacity to move to a city
Mhm.
like New York or wherever
Yeah.
they choose to move. And I specifically teach at a school where there are oftentimes people who come from very extremely limited financial means, and it does seem audacious to pursue that goal. And sometimes we weigh those options, and sometimes it's something where someone, once they're kind of more aligned with the tools and the realities. I mean, one of the things I make them do is make a budget and make just to get a sense of how wrong those numbers can be. Because I'll have a 22-year-old come to me and say, well, to live in New York, you need $4,500 a month for rent and you need, $1,500 a month for groceries. And I'm like, look, I'm sure there is someone for whom those are a reality. I've been here as long as you've been alive, and that's never been my reality, so
Yeah.
that I think it's good. The more information we have, the more we can kind of autopilot and figure out where things can come in. I moved with credit card debt. I
Mhm.
moved with with negative, as opposed to, people are like, well, how much money did you have? And I was like, I didn't. I had, but it forced me to go out and get a job, and then get a job that paid more. And, I mean, those kinds of things, at least then, and hopefully not, there was always, okay, well, if you sublet this room, or if have roommates, or if you find I my second apartment in New York was a one bedroom. I had the bedroom. A sweet, sweet guy from Turkey who had put it on Craigslist. I mean, those are the days we found apartments on Craigslist. He stayed in the living room, and we were paying next to nothing
Yeah.
because we were splitting a one. I mean, it was probably not legal, but it was. I lived there for a year or two. So yeah.
Yeah, I think audacity is such a good word for it, right? Like I love that word because that is what it is. It's having the audacity with the understanding of what the numbers are. I think sometimes it goes the other way of like we're either going to completely shut our eyes, not look at anything and just be on a, wing and a prayer, or it's the other where it's like the numbers are telling me I can't do this rather than I'm looking at the numbers, it feels scary, but I'm going to have the audacity to say yes. I think that's such a good way to describe it. So you mentioned like when you move in your trajectory here, I know you got a BFA, you were an actor, and now you are here, casting director. Can you talk about that transition for you, what that looked like from move to now?
Yeah, sure. So I was a musical theater major in school. I went to Otterbein. Then it was Otterbein College. Now it's Otterbein University, which is
Mhm.
just outside of Columbus, Ohio. And I was in the musical theater program there. And one of the kind of main things about that program, one of the, I guess, keystones of that program is, then and now, there was an internship requirement where all of the senior BFA performance majors did some sort of business focused, business of the business focal kind of internship. And in those days, they were almost primarily, all of them were primarily in casting, right? It was something where I interned at a place called Johnson Liff Casting, which back in the 80s and 90s was kind of the powerhouse office in New York. We cast a number of flop shows no one's ever heard of, like Phantom and Les Mis and Cats and Miss Saigon and the producers, and all of that. So I was there towards the very end of that office's existence, and um, you know but it was great because I would have a classmate at every office. I could call over to Telsey or to Binder or to
Mm.
ABC TV or NBC. I could call any of those offices. Not that I had much of a reason to, but one of my classmates would pick up the phone. And so we were all kind of spread out, and it was a really wonderful thing. While it no longer really possible in that way, but it was a unique thing about that program. Um, for many years, since I've had my own Otterbein interns, and it's a cool way to
Mhm.
kind of learn hands-on. So I came here to do that essentially halfway through my senior year. I came here to live in New York, for ostensibly the first time. I came to learn about casting, which was still very much not the focus. I was gonna finish this internship and then go do a senior showcase that spring, which I
Mm.
which I did. But the idea was, I think, the industry moves so quickly, particularly now, but certainly then as well, that they could teach us everything they could think of in Ohio, but it might not be relevant to the current climate, the current landscape. So I ended up interning there for about 4 months, working on some of those shows I just mentioned, and in the course of that time, got very familiar with the casting world. But I didn't go in thinking it would be what I would do for the rest of my life.
Mm.
By the time that concluded, I was pretty vested in those circles. But then I had to go wear the other hat and be a performer, and I did that, and was I would say I probably kind of lived in both pools for a year or two. I mean,
Mm.
Johnson Lift closed. I applied for other casting jobs, none of which I got, and it was something where survival in New York was kind of the name of the game more than the exact function that I was,
Mhm.
pursuing. So I auditioned and I did a couple, things here and there. I also started picking up some casting work from people I had known in the world, writers, directors. Oh, I'm doing a reading. Okay, I'll cast it, and it was something where I was, I think, aspirational about seeing. I just wanted to be involved, I wanted
Mm.
to kind of be in the midst of something. So that fall, I cast my first reading. It was a friend who was a writer, had a musical they were doing a reading of off Broadway, and I cast that, and I did that for about 2 years, where I was temping during the day at a real estate company, that I was a personal assistant, and I did a lot of those kinds of things to make my rent and to make my kind of what I needed. But 2005, so about 2 years after I graduated, I had enough casting stuff going on. I had my first off-Broadway show, a show that we had done at every level, and then it moved to an off-Broadway run. That I decided to kind of I decided I had to make the choice. I decided I
Mm.
had to pick one or the other. I wasn't being taken as seriously in the casting field because I was still acting. I
Mm.
wasn't taken as seriously in the acting field because I also did these other things, right?
Mm.
So I don't know. I mean, I think the world and the industry may be more welcoming of kind of hybrids. That's always been a tricky one, I think. The
Yeah.
casting director who's also an actor, that's not
Yeah.
unheard of, but tricky, for probably for good reason, And so, but it definitely in those days it was definitely pick a lane, make a choice, figure out what you wanted to do. So I chose the casting thing, and I moved into my first office. That was particularly a time when you really needed an office to be taken seriously because everything was through the mail and messengers, and
Mm.
actors coming to pick up sides because nobody had a printer or email. I mean, people had email, but, my first office was Alan Filderman, who recently passed away, was a longtime casting director who had an office on West 39th Street, and he had an extra desk, and we were able to. It helped him to kind of split the rent, and it helped me to have a place to call. And we stayed in, with some years off, we stayed in that scenario for about 15 years, where we shared space and kind of were separate businesses, but office roommates, office suite
Mm,
mates. And so, but that kind of got me on the trajectory to then do this full time, which now 20 years later, I've been doing ever since. But that it was very much in order to be taken seriously or compete for things, I needed to kind of put the cart before the horse in terms of uh, getting an office space and all of that set up. So that's kind of the rambly origin story, but
yeah. So with all of that in your origin story, was there ever a time, I mean, you talked about coming to the city with debt and like having the thought of like, I gotta make this work, I gotta make rent. Did you feel like a starving artist? Was that narrative, like, was that something that ran through your head? Was there a point where you felt that was not your reality anymore? Was it part of your decision to choose the casting lane? Like, can you tell me about how the money stuff played into this origin story?
yeah, I wouldn't say I think that ultimately I was pretty scrappy
Mm,
and it was always about figuring it out. I mean,
yeah.
I think the best fine I grew up pretty squarely middle class and the best but my parents were very supportive and helped me through college. I mean, my dad had made it known that when I finished college I was very much on my own, and um that was an incredible gift when I really reflect on it. That's how for me that was something where it forced a self-reliance that always kind of there wasn't really a net, but I knew that in my case, I was fortunate that there was an extreme net, but one that I never had to rely
Mm,
upon. I mean, it was something where some people don't have that privilege or that opportunity. And maybe because of that, I always felt possible. I felt it possible to be able to kind of find the self-reliance within New York. I mean, it was
mm,
something where I remember my first temp job. I remember just getting those first checks and realizing, okay, well, if I work this many hours, I can pay my rent, and then if I work this many hours, I can have a sandwich. Like it was kind of just figuring out what was possible.
yeah.
So I don't know that it ever felt particularly, I mean, I made a lot of mistakes
Mm,
over the years, and many of them financial. I mean, I lived with fairly constant credit card debt and other kinds of, you know, paying one bill to pay the, like juggling up until probably shortly before the pandemic. I mean,
mm,
it was something where that was just a reality. In my case, I had payroll to meet. I had, if I had an assistant, if I had the looming overhead of an office. The pandemic in many ways was a a kind of restart because all of a sudden we could evaluate the things I think we never would have stopped to evaluate
mm,
otherwise. In my case, it was at that point I had taken Alan had retired more or less and moved out of the office that we shared. So I was paying both halves of the rent for
yeah.
a space that I mean,
Yeah.
it became quite costly, but I never had the time to stop and say, okay, should we get a different space? Should I get someone else in here? Should I put up a flex wall? Like what happened? When the pandemic hit, I said, do I even need an office? Do I
Mm,
even need a physical office? Save 50, $60,000 a year, just get and it became the most liberating kind of freeing myself of that tether. um and I never thought I would be someone who enjoyed working from home.
mm.
Now you couldn't pay me to have to commute every day. I mean, I'm still in Manhattan a few days a week for auditions and things, but the nomadic existence is so freeing in terms of I save an hour a day, and it's the worst hour of the day, dealing with the people on the subway and the this and the that. So it's the short answer is I think I was always more optimistic and kind of probably not always the brightest, but I always figured that it would work itself out in terms of
Yeah.
that kind of starving. I mean, there were plenty of months where I was like, well, not going to be getting takeout this month, or not going to
Yeah.
be, buying a new coat, I mean, whatever that was, but that at the same time, um, I think that I always operated with a little bit of a flexibility in terms of, when I see things that are so rigid, sometimes, going to that birthday party or that opening or whatever it is, that's the thing that's going to lead to the next five jobs, and it's planting seeds that end up being more beneficial than not. So I think being able to operate with that type of flexible mindset is always a benefit more than and listen, I've been on both sides where it can really bite you as well, so
Sure.
figuring out that juggle.
Definitely. So as we're talking about, right, like the money stuff, you having been a performer now on the other side of the table and having been in the industry for a while now, I want to hear some of your opinions about what actors should be spending money on and what's not worth it. And I always want to like pull back here and bring some nuance to the conversation of spending money on your career does not automatically equal bookings, right? Just like, doing all like you could do so much for free and get traction in your career. You could spend a lot of money and get traction or get no traction. Like there isn't an equation here. But I'd love to know for you, again, seeing a lot of actors and having been in the world yourself on that side, what would you say is, let's start with, I'm actually going to let you choose. If you want to start with like what you think is the biggest waste of money, and what do you think is the thing that gives the biggest ROI when it comes to putting money towards your artistic career?
Well, it's a really good question, and it's really hard for me to answer as someone
Sure.
who's not specifically in those shoes, right? I have
Mm,
a sense of it, kind of a high level sense of what I think is beneficial. I think that this is a relational business, and it's one where people benefit from investing in the long game, more so than the kind of the short burst. I've
mm,
seen a lot of cycles of, okay, there are, I wish there were that someone actually would compile the numbers, but let's say there are 2,000 or 4,000. I mean, I truly don't know which it would be, but let's say 2,000 recent graduate performing artists move to New York each year. That may be low, that may be high. I don't know, but it seems like whatever the number is, it grows every year, right?
mm,
So if that's the case, that's going to be diminishing returns in terms of how many of them are still pursuing it.
mm,
I'll have people that I call in from a showcase 6 months after their college showcase, and I get an autoresponder that they've moved to Paris and are working in fashion marketing, and I mean, and so it just becomes okay, great.
yeah.
I'll get a then I'll have times where there's someone that has been at it for 10 years, and I only see them 10 years after that showcase, or
Mm,
someone who didn't go to school for this specifically and didn't have that kind of launching pad, but they come to auditions, and we meet them, and get to know them that way. So there are a lot of different paths, there are a lot of different trajectories. In terms of ROI, I think that ROI can be determined based on you know it's there's a short-term ROI and a long-term ROI,
mm,
right? And that if somebody is investing in the long game, eventually I'm going to get to know them. My colleagues we're going to have a sense of who they are and what they do. It may take 10 or 15 or 20 impressions. It may take all of those auditions, and we work with them in a class, and we see them on the subway, and like it takes all those different kind of
mm,
points of connection. But after 8 years or 14 years or 6 months or whatever it is for each individual person, they gain a relationship from which someone in my position can say, okay, it's worth seeing them for this project. Or, a lot of what I do is based on familiarity. And
mm,
anytime I'm going through submissions on, let's say we have a breakdown out for a project, I know I'm going to miss really good people. I know that if there are 2,000 people submitted, I'm going to miss. And my job is to figure out who to set up for, 10 slots or 30 slots or whatever it is. I'm going to miss really good people. I couldn't possibly, none of us could possibly assess every single, interested candidate. So we rely on familiarity. We rely upon whose work is known to us, whose work has made an impression on us, whose work has been consistent, whose body of work, maybe we don't know them as well, but we do the research and figure out who is going to bring value to that opportunity. So to me, the things that may be the most valuable are things that are going to impact overall industry relationships.
Mm,
One thing I tell my students, one thing I've told people over time is, um, if you have a set amount of money that you can spend, or if you can give yourself a set amount of money you can spend, I always say, I cast musicals primarily. That primarily that's my focus, and there are a lot of really great, piano-based vocal coaches who are also audition accompanists, who are also composers, who are also arrangers, who are also conductors, who wear many different hats. If you just spend a year coaching with a different piano-based coach once a month, in the course of a year, you've met 12 new people. You've
mm.
increased the odds, by fairly significantly that you're going to walk into audition and know someone in the room or know the guy who's the person behind the piano. And it may be, and those are also the kinds of people who are constantly coming to me and saying, "Hey, can you get these three people in?" Or, "Hey, I just met this person," or, "I just coached them. I think they'd be really good for this project." I mean, so anything that involves, it's not so much at that point, it's not so much about the investment, saying you've paid them for their time, they've given you something in return, the coaching, the skill, the insight, the track, whatever it may be, but you're investing in a relationship that has long game ROI potential.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
such a good depiction of that short-term and long-term ROI. Like when you're putting money towards something in your career, thinking about both of like short-term, this is going to help me with this piece or this specific audition, right? I am paying money to get this service that's going to benefit me. And then also that long-term. I was talking with an agent for this series yesterday, and he was saying that same thing of making sure there's multiple different things you're getting out of a transaction with sometimes the limited funds, right, that we have to put towards career
Yeah.
things. So with that, was there something else you were going to say? I didn't know if I cut you off.
No, 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 not at all. No, I mean, I think that the line I toe there is that my hope would be that there are also things that are purely time investment
Mm.
that aren't necessarily monetary investment, right? I think that
That was going to be my next
they're
question. You read my mind.
oh, well, good, good, good. No, but because I never wanted to see, like, there are so many everywhere. I mean, like, the thing is, just working in this industry, I get, my Instagram, I get so many targeted ads. There's so many places one can spend their money. And at at best they feel a little exploitative when you have this field of people that are just trying to find the one thing. Oh, I'll pay for that if it can help me get this. And it's headshots and it's reels and it's coaching and it's classes with casting directors and it's oh, you need a 7-second slate shot. I mean, there's all these different ways that one can spend money. And so I'm hesitant to make that seem, like the only path. The path that I offer is one that I consider maybe higher ROI, is targeting specific things that feel like they bring value, and in kind of changing. The reason I say coach with someone different every month, specifically kind of piano-based musical theater coaches, is that then at least you're meeting 12 people. Then at
Mm.
least you're adding 12 phone numbers to I won't say Rolodex
I was about
because
to say
we'll get
Rolodex.
some, we'll get some blank stares, but you can ask ChatGPT what a Rolodex is. But you know, there's it's about thinking plentifully, and in the course of that, you might say, okay, I met with 12 people. These two I really never need to see again for the rest of like that wasn't a fit. Of these 10, here are two people that I'm really going to bring stuff to when I have a screamy pop rock audition, and like that's where they live, that's where they groove, that's their knowledge base. This person I'm going to go to when I have the Muni's doing a big Rodgers and Hammerstein, traditional kind of show. These are the people I'm going to bring this to. So that there's a you're also gaining the knowledge of specialty. Who specializes in this? Who specializes in this? You're building collaborators to the same mindset, being able to just see theater however possible, go to readings, be on the scene, make oneself known is valuable and often free or extremely inexpensive if you can figure out the thing. I mean, one thing that I always did when I had office interns, I would always give them a membership to I guess I can say it out loud, play by play, which is, play-by-play.com. And, it's one of many kind of papering services in the city. I think there's audience extras. I don't know if any of these, still exist, but there are many of these things where you pay $100 a year and then you get unlimited $5 tickets or something like that. The numbers may have changed a bit, but I would always do that because um, I had that my first year in the city and I saw everything. Now, the
Mm,
options have dwindled over the years. It used to be you could see Broadway shows and I would just go every night and see something, and some of it was horrible and some of it was, lifelong impact, So
yeah.
I would always do that with interns and people who had just moved to the city, and I would want them to come in the next morning and say, I saw the worst, you know, zombie musical about zombies, and there was, like, I mean, just like, and because those are the things that we all, like, but the thing is, anytime they would do that, they would say, oh, but she was really good, but he, and I think of that in terms of my own trajectory, that I've cast some really terrible zombie musicals over the years, and many of them had very little, they didn't match any of the three things. They weren't artistically fulfilling. They didn't pay me a wage I deserved. They weren't, adding what is it relate, adding
Mhm.
relationships or, but they I guess they, to some extent were, because if you leave with one person who becomes a lifelong kind of person that you work with and that that's worth the thing, right?
Mm,
And so I can trace most of my larger jobs that I have these days to crappy favors that I did once upon a time. And
yeah.
so I no longer do as many crappy favors. I'm a bit pickier, I hope. But that I can really see that trajectory of like, yeah, I never would have met that person if I hadn't said yes to this thing that didn't really look that great on paper.
Mm,
But I that was my investment in that relationship, or in that knowledge base, because if you cast things that are low budget, sometimes you got to be really scrappy in terms of figuring out, you're going to get 30 no's before you get a yes.
mhm.
So you learn a lot of actors and you figure out a lot of who's going to excel in what environment. I became better at my career as a result of those.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say as well too is like the idea of creative constraint, which brings out, I think, the best art in us, right? When you are given a constraint of, I don't have unlimited money to spend on show tickets or classes or like the things, there's this narrative of like, it costs so much to be an actor. So if I don't have that money yet, I'm going to try and get the money to be able to spend it rather than saying, here are the things I want to do. I want to see more shows. I want to meet these people. I want to do whatever. How can I do that within this amount of money? And then those doors start unlocking. Like, I think it's invaluable what you experience just being a creative in the city, wanting to do what you want to do with the funds that you had, and then finding all of these different avenues to be able to do all of those things. And for my people who are listening to this who have been around a while, the whole thing in Not Starving Artists is not restricting yourself and not trying to live as small as possible. But it's about asking yourself, what is the goal here? How can I do it for free? And then if I have money to put towards it, what's actually going to give me the ROI? So I'm really glad you illustrated all of that. You sort of answered this, but I just want to ask it in a different way is what do you think is the most underrated thing that actors can do for free to support them in their career?
Um, it's I have I think it's a little bit content dictates form in
Yeah.
terms of what the goal is. I
Mm,
think when you determine what the form of, what the goal is, then you can dictate what those steps are and isolate which steps are free or low cost, right?
mm,
I think that being present is worth its weight in gold. And that means being present in the real world. There are plenty
mm,
of people who I only know them through digital submissions. For all I know, they live in Omaha and they submit on Actors Access on everything that comes up, but I don't have a sense of who they are. And I, it may be that we try to have them tape for something, and if the work is good, then we call them in for something in person. But it, it's it's something where I think we need we need that digital footprint, but we also need that in-person footprint so that of those free events, sometimes it's as simple as, I was in a day of EPAs, equity principal auditions, and a couple weeks ago, and that night I went to the theater, and one of the ushers was someone who had come in earlier that day,
mm.
and there's a world where they'd be like, oh gosh, don't see me in this, in my usher outfit, and I'm like, no, of course not. I mean, like, it was a nice point of connectivity of, I honestly respond to the hustle. I respond to the fact
Yeah.
that they're out there and doing all those things. And I guess kind of tacitly without articulating it, it prioritizes how much I'm looking out for that person because
Mm,
I see their labor. I see that they're really out there doing it. Now, ultimately it's going to boil down to who's the right person at the right time for the right thing,
yeah.
but the more of a presence on the scene someone has, I think the more impactful that is. That can also just be momentum. That could be, if I get an email and someone says, I just had 3 callbacks for, you know, this show, I'm sitting there saying, okay, I don't know you at all, but my colleague seems to think your work is quite good. So there's something to be said for that momentum
Yeah.
that can incentivize me to say, okay, let me dig in a little deeper, with that. So I mean, I think that for me, part of it is investing in cultural literacy. I mean,
Mm,
ultimately, that probably feels like one of the better free investments someone can make because again, we have access to everything. I could be casting a classic play or musical and I mean, particularly these days, I mean, this is an area where things have seemingly with the information going up, the use of it has gone down, and I'll have people coming in for something that is set in a very clear place and time, but they haven't made any accommodations to indicate that they know that, right?
yeah.
So it's something where it's like I may have had a larger grain of salt 20 years ago when, oh, maybe they never read that play or maybe they don't know that. But now everything is on YouTube, is on Spotify, is on all of these free or semi-free resources where at least figure out, okay, is there a dialogue? Is there a dialect? Is there
Mm,
Is there a physicality? What did people dress like in 1932? You know, like whatever
Yeah.
those questions are, where I applaud and appreciate the effort towards demonstrating that without hitting us over the head with it, right? And
Yeah.
I'm always a little stunned at how, I'll be pretty overt in terms of kind of instructions that we give and things that we share. But and sometimes we'll even say, very clearly, British RP dial, and then there's still someone who comes in and so I think it's just about learning how to think, oh, well, maybe I wouldn't be wearing jeans and white socks, maybe I'd be, maybe there's a different approach to this,
Mm.
so that I think after a lot of kind of rambly exposition, my answer is really cultural literacy, investing cultural literacy,
Yeah.
investing in one's kind of knowledge and awareness. And that can just be read a play every week, watch a movie every week, watch television. If your goal is to work on TV and film, what shows do you watch? Who are the showrunners? Do you follow them on Instagram? Like what do inhabit that world that you wish to be a part of because someone else is doing that and being better equipped, and all of those things are free or nominal.
Yeah.
And in my world, in the musical theater world, I'm always going to respond more to people who are more culturally literate, in the sense that if I'm randomly casting Brigadoon tomorrow, you know what that is, you know where you fit, and you're 2 days ahead of somebody else.
Mm.
And from that standpoint, you can then take, oh, well, this production's going to do this, or this product, you have it, but you at least have the basic building blocks from which to expand your knowledge.
Yeah, that's such a good answer. I love that answer.
We got there eventually,
Yeah. So I have two final questions for you.
Yeah.
The first one is there's a lot of stuff in the zeitgeist right now of like the cynicism, the doom and gloom, the industries are going to shit. There's a lot of that in the ether. And I think obviously there is validity to that of what we are actually seeing happen. And I think sometimes it's become this dark cloud that it has just become all consuming for a lot of artists. So is there anything, and I'm going to keep this vague, but is there any narrative, myth, something you're hearing that you either want to dispel or speak on? You can also pass this question if there's nothing that comes to mind.
No, no, I'm happy to speak on it. I mean, I the pandemic was, I think, a large wake up call slash motivating moment, in my particular journey, because I had made a pretty solid living as a casting director and sometimes educator, but those were my two primary lanes. And for 15 plus years at that point, that was kind of the main thing I did. It was the only thing I was doing for revenue. March 12th, 2020, I woke up having like 20 shows running all over the country, and I went to bed having zero shows running all over the
Yeah.
country. That would be the case for the next year. I was fortunate that I had savings and I was fine. I mean, I'm also a creature of rent stabilization, so I was really fine. I mean, it was
Mm.
something where um I knew a lot of people who weren't, and it was a really hard time. And to me, that coupled with a lot of other kind of just changing tides, I felt a very kind of immediate urge to diversify and to make sure that there were other streams. I
Mhm.
spent time I spent a lot of time during the pandemic trying to figure out the stock market. I mean, it was something where I watched a lot of really awful, YouTube and a lot of, Reddit and things to kind of just figure out, learn things about investing that I
Yeah.
was never taught and I had never bothered to learn. Many of those paid off. Some of them I took a bath, and some things I really I benefited from and was able to
Mhm.
live in a way that was new to me, that it wasn't just kind of um earned income, that there was such a thing as passive income, and there was such a thing as engineered income, right?
Mm.
Um I also diversified my own activities. I mean, like what here's a breaking news secret. I mean, some people know this, but like I have a an eBay business that but it was something that started during the pandemic. I sell antique postcards on eBay. I'm not even joking.
That's
But the
awesome.
idea is that, I started an eBay store partially to keep, revenue
Yeah.
up, but also because it was something that always interested me and that I had collected antique postcards for many years. So I have an eBay store where I have like 10,000 plus, postcards for sale. And it's not something I would live off of today
Mhm.
unless I wanted to. Right now, it's something that I invest in a certain amount every year and I get more listings up and, I sell 10, 15 postcards a day. And it is something though that to me is maybe a more interesting semi-passive stream than, that knowing that things could stop tomorrow. Now, there could also be a world where no one is interested in buying antique postcards anymore, right? But that it's diversified in the sense of
Yeah.
I have another stream that provides some revenue and that I can kind of turn that knob. It's also something that's let me employ people,
Mm.
to help me with that business on a small scale, but that
Yeah.
it's something that I've been able to kind of include in the whole scheme of things. So I really think it's about diversification. I think for many performers specifically, it's about figuring out, okay, what are those parallel careers, survival jobs, whatever you wish to call it, but things that one can do to that are actively bringing in revenue. I mean, I work with a web designer who's also a wonderful actor with an MFA from one of the top, but has a very lucrative web design and coding business. And I think there's a reality that that could all be kaput in a couple months or years because, but for many years that
Yeah.
seemed like the thing. The person that I mentioned there is diversifying and finding other field, because so I think it's about what brings us joy that
Mhm.
also seems sustainable. And these days it's anyone's guess, but you have to have it and you have to keep finding it and keep trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to support myself?
Yeah.
And that you may reinvent 5 times in a life or 30 times or
Yeah.
that so when I'm only an antique postcard dealer in 30 years, please buy.
That's so great. And you're speaking to the thing of being a full-time artist, meaning you make all of your money from your art and that being the benchmark of success, like hasn't been a thing for a very long time as like the thing. And I think we're moving even further away from that. And I think there's a beauty in it too, like you said, having different things that bring you joy. I always say like and not just diversifying streams of income, but diversifying your streams of joy. Because I think we can't put all of
100%.
that in our creative careers, right? Because they are so volatile. So I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, and
Um,
just to interject on that though too,
yeah.
that there were many years where I love teaching and it's something that I enjoy and it's something that I work hard at trying to be relevant with, but it's something where there were many years where, I would go teach at a university and that would give me what I needed to keep my office open that month because,
Mm,
our show closed or we had, this thing fell through. So, so that's something that as long as I've been doing this, I mean, there was a time when when I was an actor and first moved to the city, I was on every focus group mailing list you could be on, for like marketing focus groups.
yeah.
And this was probably maybe like 2014, 2015, but I get an email one day saying, we'll give you $250 to come to, a marketing. It was like about like chips, like selling potato chips. And I was like, I'm not doing anything. So I go to the thing. There's an actor I know who's sitting there being like, what are you doing? I was like, they said they'd give me $250 and, chips. I mean, I get free food, so I mean, it's like
Yeah.
there's never, it's about a scrappiness that,
Yeah.
whatever it takes to meet that nut to be able to kind of um continue and exist on a long-term basis.
Mm, so good. So, my final question for you as we end
Sure.
today is what is the best thing you've spent money on in the past couple of years? Just something that really.
Um, I mean, so many ways to answer that. I think that, oh, it's a good one, and I I think that I think I'll go kind of in two lanes. I think
Okay.
one, let's go back, buying and selling, paper ephemera, antique postcards, things, for me, I actually really enjoy it because I mean, the secret is there's a massively larger ROI, return on investment, than I would have in the current stock market, in the current, it's something
Mhm.
where I have pennies into these and I'm selling them 15, $20, whatever it is.
Mhm.
So for me, buying that inventory and being able to flip it on a long-term basis and have kind of that income steadily, that's actually quite liberating. That's actually,
Yeah.
there's something that's actually quite satisfying to knowing that I could just stop listing today and I'll still be selling these things as long as I wish to. And if I
Mhm.
don't wish to do it, I could sell it to somebody else and, get back a lot more than I put into it, right? That's satisfying. I think on a quality of life basis,
Mhm.
I've invested in, I've lived in my apartment for 15 years. As I mentioned, I'm rent stabilized. I've been here a long time. I am very lucky in that regard. When I compared to, what my students are finding for when they're looking at the real estate, like I know that I have a pretty sweetheart deal that, comes with some challenges. I mean, old New York buildings are not self-maintaining. So there are things that I've spent money on that go, like, does it make sense to invest in repairing things in a rental or in upgrading things in a rental? To me, it does because it's
Mhm.
my home, so I've made improvements here that my building would never make because they're not the bare minimum and they're not what's needed, but they upgrade my quality of life. And, so on a kind of small, I'm sure there's some profound, like the very best thing, but for me, it's something where just like knowing that I have safeguards and a comfortable and sustainable home environment, that's a lot that brings a lot more value to my everyday
Mhm.
than than I mean, yeah, it would be nice to buy, but at this point it would be so much, there's no reason to in my particular situation. If I did, it would be secondary, so
Yeah.
I've invested, a good bit of money in just upgrading my home that I will probably die in. So,
That's awesome.
that's the, I'll be that old man with the, I've been here since 1935, so
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. This was such a great conversation. Thank you for coming on, sharing all your thoughts, sharing all of your wisdom with us, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it.
thanks, Brooke. Yeah, thanks. Happy to be here, and what a wonderful series you're doing. So, good
Thank
luck with
you.
everything.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Come join me on Instagram for more on how to build a simple, sexy relationship with your money. My Instagram handle is @notstarvingartists. And if you want to dive deeper with me, head to the show notes to learn more about one-on-one coaching. If you love this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend that you want to get rich with.